Hi, everybody. Welcome back. And we are excited to have an incredible guy who has a really fascinating career. He's done a lot. He's a lawyer. He's taught classes in philanthropy and community development. He has also taught writing, memoir writing at Indiana Writing Center, at the Indiana Writing Center. What's even more fascinating is that he is a world traveler who's traveled extensively across the globe. He has written more than 90 articles. He is the author of 14 books, and including You Have to Get Lost Before You're Found, and then the sequel, Bringing Progress to Paradise, What I Got from Giving to a Mountain Village in Nepal. So we're thrilled to have Jeff Rasley here with us today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Namaste, Robin. Glad to be with you.
Well, I reached out to you. Well, we connected because in many respects, what you're about is very much what this podcast is about. It's Democracy Does, the Civic Power Playbook, and it's about how we all can make a contribution in this world, particularly when things may seem dire and challenging. And sometimes
Which
we all
they
get,
certainly, yeah, which they certainly do now.
yes, yes. And that leads me to my first question is, can you name in your mind one of the most pressing policy issues that we should be concerned about that people don't realize how much it's going to affect them? I know that's a broad question, but if there's one thing that is just really keeping you up at night, can you name one?
Well, taking it even more broadly, my biggest concern is that Donald Trump is a fascist.
Hmm.
And I think the evidence of that was actually clear in his 2016 campaign, but it's become absolutely clear since then. But in terms of one issue, um, the issue that I'm most concerned about because of the long-term and global effect is global warming and climate change. Um, the other policy concerns, inflation, employment, international relations, pick any of those very important issues. And in my mind, they all are diminished by climate because if the planet becomes unlivable for human beings, it doesn't really matter who's president or whether the rate of inflation is 5% or 4%. We're all going to die, along with a whole lot of animals. So that's the one that I'm really the most concerned about.
There are people who say climate change seems so large. I'm not even going to talk about the people who say it's a hoax because we're not touching that. But what about the people who say it seems so overwhelming? I don't even know what to do.
Yeah, I understand that. And especially when you try to think about, well, what can I personally do? I personally think that we should each be as environmentally responsible as we can be without giving up a good life. And I think we should be voting for, campaigning for politicians who understand the importance of climate and environmentalism and working to make sure the right candidates are elected and the wrong candidates are defeated.
When doing research, I saw that you taught a couple of classes about how to do community development and to do community development the right way. And you said that's really important now with the reversal of social welfare and humanitarian funding by the Trump administration. So tell me, what is the right way? And what did you mean by that?
Well, and what I've written about in terms of community development for the most part is private philanthropic efforts as opposed to government. And so what I learned from doing this in Nepal, which started back actually in the mid 90s, um, was that there are several sort of key elements to doing it right. Number one is local people where within the community have to ultimately be in charge of it. So, for example, in our Basa Village Foundation, one of our governing principles is that there will be no development project that is not requested by the local people. And so the local people in Basa, Nepal, basically, they don't have any money. Um, just they're farmers, they're subsistence farmers, and so they grow what they eat what they grow, and that's how they live. And as long as the weather cooperates, they've maintained the same lifestyle for over 500 years. But they decided that they wanted to develop their village, and they started with a school. And so they requested help to create a school. And because they don't have the money, and which is the case in, most underdeveloped communities, whether it's urban or, whether it's what we used to call third world, that underdeveloped countries, they don't have the capital themselves. So the capital has to come from the outside, and expertise sometimes has to come from the outside. But in terms of owning the development, it's essential that the local people do, or it won't work. And I can give, kind of funny examples in Nepal of where local people did not own the project and it didn't work, like building a bridge across a river where nobody crossed. Um, a wealthy German woman philanthropist fell in love with the bridges in Nepal because they're really cool structures. These either cable bridges or just wooden platform bridges. So she thought it would be cool to donate one. So she did. She picked a location. Nobody uses it. Um,
But that's a
and
perfect example of you don't parachute in and tell people how to do it. You listen to the local community.
yeah,
Okay, go ahead, please.
exactly. Um, but so in the case of our Basa Foundation, the first project was a school. And so the community created its very first school board, and that's now been functioning for 20 some years. Um, the next project they requested was electricity. So we raised the money to buy all the equipment to build a hydroelectric plant on the nearest stream to the village. Um, and the villagers actually collected all of those parts in Kathmandu, trucked them to the end of the road, and then carried them on their backs for 5 days from where the road ends to where the village is. And then, with the supervision of a local Nepali engineer, um, they built their own hydroelectric system. Um, and then it's a similar process for a water system, and they created their own utility board. So, they decided what they wanted. They requested the outside help that they needed, and our foundation provided the help that they requested. But other than that, which was basically money and some advice, um, but they own it, they run it, and that's how development should work. And I haven't been involved in terms of foundational on the ground work in tribal communities in the US, but I wrote a book from studying their situation, which is very similar to the problems with undeveloped communities over in Nepal and in countries that, like I said, we used to call third world. Here in the United States, the poorest people in the United States are Native Americans. It's not even close if you look at the statistics. And I was shocked and amazed when I first went out to South Dakota to visit reservations. And particularly, I was really interested in Wounded Knee because of an ancestral connection to the massacre. But there, the standard of living truly shocked me. And so, I looked into it and concluded that, a similar approach in terms of private foundation work ought to be done there. But also in this case, because we have such a wealthy government, the government should be directly involved, and which it has been off and on, but never consistently, and in many cases, not with a lot of success because it hasn't involved local ownership. It's been done, as you put it, swooping in from the outside and having this, model. This is how we're going to do it, and then just putting that sort of template onto any community, and it doesn't work.
So, what do you think we should do now to tie in what you're talking about in terms of the climate change as well as community development? Because let's think about this. Let's look at what happened in Texas and the horrible flooding. So that's a multi-tiered factor in terms of what we're discussing. So climate change, clearly. And then we have the gutting of the National Weather Service and a lot of people, key people who may have been able to put warning systems in place. And then we have failures on the local level. But you also have an enclave of people who said that they did not want funding from the federal government because the federal government was, at the time, another administration was the devil. So how do you reconcile that? What are your thoughts about that? If that's too politically charged a question, we don't have to answer that, but I'd be
Well,
curious to hear what you think.
yeah, I don't mind. In terms of local people who don't want help that they need because the federal government or some other level of government is of the wrong, controlled by the wrong party. Um, I think Forrest Gump has a wisdom they should consider, which is stupid is as stupid does. And um, it's if you have a need and resources are required to fulfill that need, and you don't have those resources, and there's a government entity or a outside foundation or some source that's willing to provide those resources, and you turn it down, that's stupidity. So it's something I don't understand. I mean, I understand people having pride and not wanting to beg, not wanting to be dependent. But that's the thing about having local ownership of in community development is the reason you want to do that is to avoid the kind of welfare dependency mentality. It's, you own it, you run it. Yes, it required capital investment from the outside, but when it's yours, then you're dependent on yourself. You don't have this dependent. Now, it may require some kind of continued funding for some period of time, but then we transition to economic development, which is ultimately is kind of the end point of infrastructural development. I mean, if you take a community like Bassa or Wounded Knee, South Dakota, which is basically at ground zero in terms of infrastructural development, um, all the resources to develop that initial infrastructure has to come from the outside because there isn't any on the inside. But once the infrastructure is developed, if you have decent utility service, you have decent schools, then economic development is what needs to occur because then once you have an economy that's functioning, you won't need the resources coming in from the outside.
What does that look like now? Let's talk about where we are today with the new legislation that's being passed, that's going to go into effect sooner than people think, that's going to have an impact that's going to be more painful than people think or know. How can Americans prepare? How can we embrace self sufficiency or community empowerment? What would you see and what would you recommend?
Yeah, I think we're in for a really difficult period. Something just, coincidentally is kind of interesting, right on topic. Yesterday, I gave a talk to an organization here in Indianapolis called the Science Tech Club, and my talk was about economic cycles of boom and bust in Indiana communities, and how some communities have been, dependent on a particular industry that boomed and the community prospered, then the industry went bust and the community began to die. Um, and one of the interesting points that I didn't make, but people in the audience made, was that many rural hospitals in Indiana, as in every state, are expected to close because of the Trump's little ugly bill. Um, and so one of the, essential infrastructural developments that a healthy community needs is healthcare. I mean, we can tick through the list of education and utilities and communications, but healthcare is definitely one of them. And so in a state like Indiana, that our last big bust was auto and steel, where over 300 towns in Indiana have lost population since 1980, when those two big industries went bust, and because our so many communities were just so dependent on those industries. Okay, well, so now what are we going to do about it? If if you have a community that's already suffering and your hospital is being taken away, and healthcare, and we agree, I hope, that healthcare is an essential element of a decent life in our contemporary world, especially in a country as wealthy as ours is. Okay, so what's going to happen? Well, if your community is already, underdeveloped and on the decline, not on the upswing, this is a terrible thing. And the only way that that can reverse is if somehow money from the outside is found to keep that hospital open, because the local community just doesn't have it. So we're sort of, we're back to where I started talking about a place like Wounded Knee or Bassa Village. There's got to be some way to bring in the capital to sustain those sort of essential infrastructural institutions. And if you don't have it, I mean, there's two routes to go. One is economic development, where businesses that are actually profitable start in the community so that revenue is generated, the tax base increases, or the government or foundation money has to come in and just take care of the initial capitalization and the maintenance cost until there's sufficient economic development that the community can pay its own way.
Let me ask you, when you did Basa, was there a leader in the village that contacted you, or did you find Basa? Because when you are talking about people in communities that are broken or are operating at a deficit, I shouldn't say broken, but how do you even know who to reach out to?
Well, it's an interesting story. So I started going to Nepal for the first time in 1995. because I had turned 40 and was having symptoms of a midlife crisis. And and I already had a sports car convertible and a Harley motorcycle. And I came home from work one day, and my wife slapped down this brochure in front of me that was trekking the Mount Everest Base Camp Trail. And she said, "Why don't you go do this?" And so she was basically saying, "Honey, go take a hike and make it a big one." Um, so I did, and I had done a lot of really sort of adventure type travel before, but I was in a period of life where I was really busy. I was the head of a small law firm. I was on 7 different boards, raising 2 kids. Life had just sort of closed in on me. And she realized I needed to break out. And so, anyway, so I went, I did it. I fell in love with the Nepal Himalayas and the people that live up in the high mountains. And so I learned mountaineering. Eventually, after a few years, began organizing and leading expeditions myself. And every time I would do an expedition, I would also couple it with some kind of philanthropic project, and which I coined the term philanthrotrekking. And people that would come in my groups would participate. But in 2006, I had changed the local outfitter company that I was using to a company that was entirely staffed by people from Bassa Village. I knew nothing about Bassa Village, never heard of it. But I became very close to the people, which you tend to do. You're sleeping in tents, and it's very physically challenging. And I really like these guys from Bassa Village, and I learned a lot about their village over the course of our 3.5 weeks or so up in the mountains. And at the end of it, they asked me if I would be willing to either contribute or raise $5,000 for their school, which they'd already started. They had a school with 3 grades, and they wanted to add a fourth and a fifth grade. And so, of course, I said yes. And the owner of the company, his name is Niru Rai, was kind of a village leader. He was the only outside employer of the village, and he grew up there, and his family had been there forever. Um, so he was very integrated into the village structure, although he had a home in Bassa, but he'd also had a home in Kathmandu because he had this successful trekking company. But so Niru and I started this conversation, and we developed these principles about doing infrastructure work with Bassa. Um, and out of those conversations grew our 501(c)(3) organization is Bassa Village NGO, our sister foundation. Um, and so, in a way, Bassa found me, but in another way, I found it because I employed
Yeah.
the outfitter company that was staffed by these guys, and it was a just kind of a lucky marriage
Mhm.
that we've maintained ever since. And Niru and I are almost sort of like cousins now because we're in regular touch with each other and exchange gifts, and yeah,
Oh, that's
so.
lovely. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Well, Jeff, this is great. I've just 2 more really quick questions for you then. One is in this podcast, I have something called the power play. And I ask my guest, what are 1 to 3 tips that you would recommend someone can do who's listening to make some kind of difference? Because when I was creating this, I would talk to people who said, I'm so upset with where we are, but I just don't know what to do. What can I do? I don't want to go out to protest. I want to feel like I can make some actionable change just in my own little corner. What would you recommend if you had 1 to 3 recommendations? What is your power play?
Well, okay, so I have two. When I was a baby, I'm told that I rode in my first political parade, which was in 1956 for Ike Eisenhower. And I still have an I Like Ike pencil that I supposedly, I don't remember it, was given to it, but given to me to ride in the parade and wave it around anyway. So my family was involved in politics and has been through several generations. And I would say number one is be politically involved, and at whatever level sort of feels right to you, whether it's your local county commissioner or higher office, but actually be involved. Um, and don't just sit on the sidelines and bitch about it. And then the second is be a volunteer. If if you're materially wealthy, give money, but give it in a way that really, touches your own heart and that you can somehow be involved with it beyond just writing a check. If you don't have a lot of money, you don't, you're not comfortable enough financially to give much away, be a volunteer. And sure, especially people with young families, life is very busy, time is precious, but let's face it, you sleep 8 hours, you're awake 16 hours. Surely within that period of time, there's some amount of time you could give as a volunteer. So find a charitable activity that, again, really touches your heart, that you feel something. Because if you don't, if it's just, if it feels like work, you're just doing more work, don't do it. Do something that just makes you feel good so that there's this mutuality within your philanthropy.
Excellent. That's great advice. And then just any tips on you- combating climate. Is there anything you would recommend the average person do?
Yeah, I think there's I mean it's a bit repetitive, but number one, think about your own environmental footprint and without, giving up the things that you really enjoy that make life good, do what you can on just a personal level. Number two, be politically active and support those on the right side. And number three, call any companies, businesses accountable that you have a connection with, even if you're just a regular consumer. Like if you buy a particular product that is clearly using too much plastic, that they could reduce the size of the container, they could use a different material or something, tell them, let them know. A lot of companies are surprisingly responsive when you actually contact them. So, that's it. Personal, political, economic.
Excellent. Those are great tips. That's more than just 3. You gave me 6. That's perfect.
Okay,
Yeah. Thank you so
good.
much. Thank you, Jeff Rasley, for teaching us, showing us how to do it because you really do put words into action. So thank you. We really appreciate it.
Robin, thank you. It's been great talking to you. I hope we'll do it again.
Thank you. Absolutely.